The wind scraped across the empty plains outside of Dustmere, a sun-faded town that existed more in the rearview mirrors of passing truckers than on any real map. Streetlights flickered and hummed, casting sickly halos onto cracked sidewalks and rusted signs. Inside Tuck's Diner, the only 24-hour place for 60 miles, Miguel Sanchez wiped down the counter with slow, tired strokes. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. It was past 2 a.m., and he was the only worker left: cook, cashier, cleaner, all rolled into one. He wore a threadbare hoodie beneath his grease-stained apron, trying to ward off the biting draft that slipped in through the diner's old windows. Behind the counter, his fraying backpack sagged under the weight of textbooks, job applications, and a tin of loose change he'd scraped together over weeks. Miguel's phone, its screen webbed with cracks, lay charging on the wall socket nearby, displaying a dismal 3% battery. He had to ration it. He still needed to call his grandfather to check on his meds later. The bell above the door suddenly jingled with a jarring urgency. Miguel looked up, instinctively stepping back, his hand brushing the coffee pot as if it might protect him. A woman stood in the doorway, gasping for breath. She looked completely out of place, mid-40s, wearing a midnight blue coat that shimmered under the fluorescent lights, her heels scuffed but expensive, and her hair tousled in an elegant kind of disarray. Her makeup was smudged slightly, like someone who'd been crying but refused to let it show. "Please, I'm sorry to barge in," she said, her voice breathless but steady. "I need a favor." Miguel blinked, his exhaustion delaying his response. "My phone was stolen," she continued quickly, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. "I need to call my driver. I know this sounds weird, but I'm not from here. I took a wrong turn near a construction site, and someone ran into me and grabbed my phone. Please. Just one call." Miguel looked her up and down. Everything about her screamed out of place. She didn't belong in Dustmere. And yet, something in her eyes, focused, vulnerable, real, made him pause. He glanced at his phone. 2% now. He could say no. He probably should. But something in his chest said otherwise. He nodded, unplugged the phone, and slid it across the counter. "Thanks," the woman said softly, like it truly mattered. She turned slightly away and dialed a number from memory, her voice low but firm. "It's me," she said. "I'm at Tuck's Diner in Dustmere. My phone's gone. Just get here fast. No, don't call the sheriff. I'm fine, just hurry." She hung up, her hands trembling faintly. For a second, she didn't move. Then she exhaled and passed the phone back, careful not to let her fingers linger too long. "Thank you," she said again, locking eyes with him. "You didn't have to trust me." Miguel shrugged. "Didn't seem like you were lying." She smiled, a small, weary smile that didn't reach her eyes but felt genuine all the same. "Miguel," she said, glancing at his name tag. "Are you in school?" He nodded. "Trying to finish culinary school. Still working off last semester's tuition." "That explains the textbooks," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Her eyes wandered to his backpack, the battered edges of a notebook sticking out, the duct-taped corner of his phone. She was observing everything. "I'm Adrienne," she offered, suddenly. "Thank you, Miguel." "Anytime," he said, though they both knew this wasn't the kind of situation that would ever repeat itself. They stood in silence for a few moments, the diner buzzing faintly with the hum of the old fridge. Outside, headlights appeared in the distance. A long, black SUV approached smoothly, tires whispering on the pavement. It slowed to a stop right in front of the diner. "That's my ride," she said quietly. Then, she turned to him again. "You know, people don't usually help strangers anymore. You didn't even ask who I was." Miguel gave a tired half-smile. Didn't seem like it'd change anything. She paused, clearly struck by the answer. Maybe it shouldn't. But still, it means something. Especially these days. The SUV's back door opened with practiced silence, and a driver in a suit stepped out, holding the door for her. Adrienne looked at Miguel one last time. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." She stepped into the vehicle. The door shut with a gentle click. The SUV pulled away, melting back into the night. Miguel stood there for a while, arms crossed over his chest, the cold seeping through the glass. The diner suddenly felt quieter, lonelier. He picked up his phone. It had died right after the call. He plugged it back in and turned to clean the last of the tables. He didn't know that the woman he just helped was Adrienne Karen, founder of the elusive Equinox Trust, a private foundation known only in elite circles for funding massive global humanitarian efforts. He didn't know that her driver was taking her not just to a safe hotel, but to a private airfield. And most of all, he didn't know that while she sat in the back of that car, staring out the window into the endless flatlands of Dustmere, she was still thinking about the boy in the hoodie who handed her his nearly dead phone without a second thought. It had been a long time since anyone had reminded her what quiet decency looked like. And even longer since she had felt it herself. Tomorrow, she would make a call of her own. And Miguel's world would never be the same. The morning sun in Dustmere rose reluctantly, casting a dusty orange hue over the sleepy town. Miguel stood at the diner's side entrance, a paper bag of stale pastries in one hand and his backpack slung over the other shoulder. He yawned, eyes gritty from another night without proper sleep. The bags beneath them had turned from temporary to permanent. He shoved his cracked phone into his pocket, battery still unreliable, and began his usual walk home. The morning traffic was sparse, a rusted pickup, a beat-up delivery van, and a kid on a scooter too big for him. Miguel's one-room apartment sat above an old laundromat. The stairs creaked like they were warning him with every step. He unlocked his door, walked in, and was immediately hit by the usual blend of detergent, dust, and faint mildew. His mattress, barely a few inches thick, lay next to a cracked window covered in plastic to keep out the wind. He dropped his bag and collapsed onto it fully dressed. He didn't sleep. He just stared at the ceiling. His mind kept drifting back to the woman from the diner. Adrienne. There was something about her, something that felt bigger than the encounter itself. Not just the coat or the car. Something in her eyes. That look right before she left, like she had just seen something she didn't expect to find in a town like Dustmere. Miguel shook it off. That was just a moment. A weird, surreal moment, and it was over. She was probably back in some penthouse now, hundreds of miles away, and he was still here, wondering how to make his rent. By noon, Miguel had showered, eaten half a granola bar, and was scanning a list of side jobs on his cracked laptop. Most of them were miles away. All of them paid less than minimum wage. His phone buzzed in his pocket, surprising him. Unknown number. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the answer button. Probably a scam. Or another job he applied to months ago, finally calling back to tell him we'd filled the position. But something, curiosity, maybe, pushed his finger down. "Hello?" he said, cautious. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice, low and composed but warmer than before. "Hello, Miguel. This is Adrienne Karen." He sat up instantly. His brain fumbled for words. I didn't expect." "I know," she said, gently cutting in. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up. But I'm glad you did." Miguel swallowed hard. "Did I? Is something wrong? Did I do something?" "No, not at all," she replied, her tone easing the tension. "Quite the opposite, actually. You did something rare. And it's been on my mind." He didn't respond. He had no idea what to say. "You helped me without asking anything in return," she continued. "You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. That's what struck me." Miguel cleared his throat. Felt like the right thing to do. "That's exactly why I'm calling." Another pause, longer this time. Miguel could hear the sound of faint city traffic in the background on her end. "I'd like to meet again," Adrienne said. "Properly. Not in a diner at 2 a.m. Miguel blinked. Sure. I mean, yeah, of course. I just, where? My team will arrange everything," she said smoothly. "There's a car waiting for you outside." Miguel froze. "Wait. What?" "Check," she said simply. Still holding the phone, Miguel stood up and moved to the window. Peeling back the plastic film, he looked down at the curb. A black SUV. Clean, sleek. Driver standing beside it in a pressed gray uniform. "Holy crap," Miguel muttered. "I'll explain everything when we meet," Adrienne said. "You don't need to bring anything, just yourself." Miguel turned around in a daze, grabbing his coat and stuffing his wallet into his pocket like it mattered. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'm coming." The driver opened the door for him with a respectful nod, like Miguel wasn't just some broke student living above a laundromat. The interior of the vehicle was pristine, soft leather seats, subtle scent of cedarwood, quiet hum of climate control. Miguel sat stiffly, backpack clutched tight to his chest like armor. They drove through parts of the region he'd only seen on postcards, rolling hills, wide lakes, bridges lined with magnolias. The dusty, dried-out world of Dustmere felt like it had disappeared behind them. An hour later, the car pulled into a long private driveway, leading to a modern glass building nestled between green hills and sunlight. Miguel had never seen anything like it. Inside, Polished floors echoed softly with every step. He was led to an elevator that opened silently and moved without a sound. On the top floor, he stepped out into a sun-drenched room with panoramic views. Adrienne stood at the window, hands clasped, wearing a muted gray suit that somehow made her look both powerful and completely at ease. She turned and smiled. "Miguel." He gave a nervous nod. "Hi. Thank you for coming," she said. "Please, sit." He took a chair across from her desk, suddenly conscious of his wrinkled shirt and faded jeans. "I owe you some context," Adrienne said, sitting down. "The other night, I wasn't just lost. I was running late from a site visit for a project my foundation funds. I took a shortcut I shouldn't have. You mentioned a driver." "Yes, but I didn't want him getting involved. There was a reason I didn't call the police, too." She opened a folder in front of her and turned it toward him. Inside, photos, screenshots, notes. Miguel's breath hitched. His name. His school. A photo of him holding a dish at a student showcase from 2 years ago. You researched me?" Adrienne smiled, not unkindly. "I had to understand why someone would help a total stranger without hesitation. Not many people would have done what you did. Especially with so little to spare." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't a big deal. It was to me." She leaned forward. "I run the Karen Initiative," she said. "We fund social enterprises. Food justice, clean water, education. And more importantly, we support people. The kind of people who do good when no one's watching." Miguel stared at her, stunned. "I want to offer you a full scholarship. Culinary school, room and board, everything. No strings. And if you're open to it, there's a leadership program we run each year. You'd be a perfect fit." Miguel blinked, unsure he was even breathing. "Are you serious?" Adrienne smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Dead serious." He looked down at the packet, then back at her. There was no pity in her face. No savior complex. Just belief. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she said simply. "And then let's see where it takes you." His fingers closed around the envelope like it might disappear. "Yes," he said, almost a whisper. "Yes." And with that, a second phone call, just like the first, became the spark that would ignite a whole new chapter of his life. The Karen Institute Retreat Center wasn't marked on any public map. Tucked away in the pine-covered slopes of northern Oregon, it looked more like a wellness resort than a leadership training facility. Modern cabins dotted a lakeside property framed by whispering trees and winding trails. Miguel stepped out of the sleek black van onto a graveled driveway, backpack slung over one shoulder, still wearing the same worn sneakers he'd had for over a year. He felt like an imposter. Around him, other young people were arriving, some wheeling glossy suitcases, others stepping out of rideshares with Apple Watches and monogrammed duffel bags. They were clearly bright, confident, accomplished. Miguel caught pieces of conversation as they passed him. Published that paper in the Journal of Global Food Ethics. Ran a non-profit in high school, but we merged with a larger org last year. Debated policy at the Youth G8 in Berlin. Miguel gripped his backpack a little tighter and adjusted the strap. The program, titled Foundations of Ethical Leadership, had selected 24 participants from around the country. Most came from Ivy League schools or had resumes that looked like startup brochures. Miguel's acceptance letter was simple, almost handwritten in tone. Adrienne had told him the selection wasn't about accolades, it was about alignment. Still, he couldn't help but feel like a kitchen intern who'd wandered onto a dead stage. Inside the main lodge, the group gathered for the welcome session. Warm lighting, leather chairs, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. Adrienne stood at the front, not in a power suit, but in a soft sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back casually. "I'm not here to lecture," she began, smiling faintly. "I'm here to learn alongside you. This program isn't about building empires. It's about building people. Strong hearts make strong systems. That's what we're testing here." Miguel sat quietly in the back, absorbing her words. He was used to structure, lesson plans, checklists, rubrics. But this felt different. Intentional, but unpredictable. Emotional, but structured. That first week hit like a wave. Workshops explored ethical dilemmas. Would you fire a brilliant but abusive team member? Would you disclose company secrets to protect public safety? Simulations tested leadership under pressure. One morning, they were divided into crisis response teams and told to prioritize limited resources for fictional disaster victims. Miguel didn't speak much at first. He observed. Took notes. Watched how others jumped to argue, to win. When his group hit a standstill, Two members shouting over each other about the moral implications of ignoring high-risk elderly in favor of children. Miguel stepped in. "Maybe we need to stop thinking about numbers," he said quietly. "And start thinking about what kind of leaders we want to be at the end of this." The group fell silent. It wasn't a dramatic statement. He hadn't raised his voice. But it shifted something. The argument stopped, the focus changed. People began listening. That became his pattern. Miguel wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. But slowly, others began turning to him when things got tense. During team challenges, he was the one who stayed after to clean up. When one participant broke down during a session about public failure, Miguel sat beside him and offered half a granola bar, no questions asked. It wasn't heroism. It was decency. By the end of week 2, something strange happened. The others started coming to him, not just for support, but for leadership. His cabin mate, Eli, once skeptical of Miguel's quiet demeanor, now asked his opinion before every group presentation. "You don't talk much," Eli said one night, "but when you do, it cuts through all the noise." The shift didn't go unnoticed by Adrienne, either. She watched from the periphery, never hovering, but always tuned in. In evening debriefs with staff, Miguel's name came up repeatedly. "He's got presence," one facilitator said. "Not the kind that fills a room, but the kind that steadies it." Midway through the program, each participant was given a stipend. Not large, but enough to cover expenses, clothes, transportation, even a treat or two. Miguel smiled when he got the envelope. He immediately set aside most of it to wire to his grandparents. They'd been scraping by since his grandmother's arthritis worsened, and his grandfather's vision had begun to fade. This would cover medicine and maybe a proper heater. That evening, as he returned to the cabin, he found Eli sitting on the edge of his bed, unusually quiet. "You good?" Miguel asked. Eli rubbed his face. "My sister's in the hospital. Autoimmune thing. Dad says we might lose the house." Miguel sat down across from him, expression steady. "You going home?" "I want to, but flights are crazy. My parents can afford it, and I don't want to leave this program, but I can't stay if I don't help." Miguel didn't hesitate. He walked to his drawer, pulled out his stipend envelope, and held it out. "Take it." Eli looked at him like he'd just handed over a piece of himself. "Dude, I can't." "That's yours." Miguel shrugged. "You need it more." Eli took it slowly, like it might vanish. Then, unexpectedly, hugged him. Neither said another word. The next morning, Adrienne's program coordinator slid a quiet note across her desk. Anonymous participant donated full stipend to peer in need. She didn't need to ask who. She already knew. But she also knew it wasn't just generosity, it was instinct. The days rolled on. Miguel led more group sessions, not because he was assigned, but because others began asking him to. He didn't try to impress. He asked questions no one else thought to. He listened with a kind of intensity that made people feel seen. One afternoon, Adrienne sat in the back of a session titled Invisible Leadership. Miguel was facilitating, hands folded calmly, surrounded by others twice as loud and 3 times as decorated. "I used to think being a leader meant knowing all the answers," he said. "Now I think it means asking the right questions. Or sometimes just staying when everyone else leaves." Adrienne felt her chest tighten, an unfamiliar feeling, something between pride and ache. She had built this place to find future leaders. But maybe Miguel was something even rarer. A reminder of the kind of leadership the world had forgotten. That evening, under the twilight hush of pine trees, Adrienne sat by herself on a wooden bench near the cabins. She watched Miguel in the distance, laughing gently with a few of the others, helping someone set up for the next session. He didn't see her watching. He didn't need to. And that, she realized, was exactly why he mattered. In a world that rewarded volume, posture, and polish, Miguel led by showing up, by choosing kindness again and again, by never needing a spotlight to know who he was. The boy who had once handed over a nearly dead phone at a forgotten roadside diner was slowly becoming the kind of leader who didn't just change systems. He changed people. And Adrienne? For the first time in years, she wasn't just investing in the future. She was believing in it. The air in Ridgefield smelled of dry soil and wood smoke. It wasn't part of the Cairn Institute's scheduled itinerary, nor was it a place that made headlines. A forgotten town in the folds of the Oregon Mountains, Ridgefield had 2 dusty roads, 1 weathered school, and a community center powered by a diesel generator that wheezed like it had bronchitis. Adrienne hadn't been there in 5 years. "Come with me," she'd said after the last leadership session of the week, pulling Miguel aside before dinner. "There's a place I need to visit." I'd like you to join. Miguel blinked. Me? Her smile was calm but held something beneath it, something vulnerable. Yes, you. The next morning, they flew in on a small Foundation chartered plane. Miguel sat by the window, watching the ground shift from cityscapes to thick green forests and dusty trails. Adrienne was quiet during the flight, lost in thought, a manila folder on her lap she never opened. When they landed, a modest SUV waited to take them through winding roads to Ridgefield. The farther they drove, the more silent Adrienne became. Miguel didn't pry. They arrived by early afternoon. Children were playing barefoot in front of the school. A dog barked lazily from beneath a porch. The wind carried the scent of pine and the faint chime of metal wind spinners turning in the breeze. Miguel stepped out of the SUV, and the heat wrapped around him like a wool blanket. He took a deep breath. Earthy, dry, but clean. He glanced at Adrienne, who stood still beside the vehicle, her eyes scanning the horizon. People emerged from their homes when they saw her, faces lit up with recognition. Some called her name. Others just hugged her without saying anything. Miguel watched, fascinated. Adrienne, the composed, enigmatic woman he knew from boardrooms and training halls, melted into something softer here. She hugged them back, held their hands, listened closely as they talked about wells and crops and the community fridge running out of space. He saw her ask questions no one else had thought to ask, about forgotten roads, broken fences, access to period products in the school nurse's office. And they answered not like she was a donor, but like she was family returning home. Still, Miguel noticed something. She kept glancing over her shoulder. Not at him. At the horizon. As if waiting for something that never quite arrived. That evening, they sat on the porch of a local family's home. The porch roof was tin, the chairs were creaky, and the sweet tea was so strong it could wake the dead. Children chased fireflies in the dirt yard. The sun dipped low over the hills, smearing gold and amber across the sky. Adrienne sat beside Miguel, her shoes off, her blazer folded on the railing. She looked nothing like the power figure that had walked into the lodge weeks ago. I grew up in a town like this, she said softly, not looking at him. Miguel turned slightly toward her. Maybe even poorer, she added. We had nothing. But we had each other. She paused. The cicadas in the trees buzzed in waves. My father was a mechanic. My mom worked nights at a diner. I got my first pair of new shoes when I was 13. Then, one night, the heater exploded. It was winter. Everyone was using space heaters. Our house caught fire. I was 16. Miguel sat in silence, unsure if he should speak. They didn't make it, she continued. I got out. Just me. Everything else was gone. Her voice didn't waver, but it didn't need to. There was a weight in her words that sat heavy between them. I slept on couches. Worked at a gas station. I got into a small community college through some program no one had heard of. I studied economics because it sounded like money. She gave a dry chuckle. Built my first app in a basement. It tanked. Built another. That one got bought. Suddenly I had more money than I knew what to do with. And then I partnered with someone I trusted. He gutted the company behind my back. She looked out toward the hills again. I lost everything. Publicly. People I thought were friends vanished. I rebuilt from the ground up. This time smarter. Colder. I stopped trusting. I learned how to build walls so tall, no one could reach me. She turned toward Miguel now. And then one night, I got lost outside a diner in the middle of nowhere. My phone was gone. I was alone. And a stranger handed me his phone without knowing who I was. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, a shy smile ghosting across his lips. You didn't calculate. You didn't try to impress me. You just helped. Like it was normal. It was normal, Miguel replied quietly. She smiled then, a real one. No polish. Just tired, human warmth. You don't know what you've done, she said. You've been undoing things in me I didn't even know were locked. Miguel's chest tightened. You've made me believe in people again, she added, voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her now, not the powerful donor, the gatekeeper, the mystery woman, but as someone who had clawed her way through fire and betrayal, only to keep standing. I'm glad, he said, just as softly. Because people believe in you, too. Probably more than you think. She turned away, blinking fast, covering her mouth as if she just realized she was about to cry. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a short, surprised sound. I haven't laughed like that in years, she admitted. What is it with you? Miguel grinned. Must be the diner magic. They sat in silence after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had been said was enough. The next morning, Miguel helped unload water filters from a truck, sweating through his shirt as he translated instructions for an elderly couple. Adrienne stood nearby, watching as he explained each step patiently, answering questions with kindness and humor. The local kids followed him around like ducklings. One girl tugged at his shirt. "Are you a teacher?" she asked. "No," he said, kneeling beside her. "Just someone who listens." Adrienne watched all of it, the way he knelt to eye level, the way he handed out stickers and sandwiches from his bag, the way he stayed behind to fix a leaking pipe when the rest of the volunteers went to lunch. She felt something break quietly inside her. Not in pain, but in surrender. She trusted him. And for someone who had built her life behind glass walls and steel willpower, that was everything. That night, she stood alone by the SUV, looking up at the stars. Miguel walked over, wiping sweat from his brow, still smiling from a conversation with the kids. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. I think I needed this trip more than you did." He shrugged. "I think we both needed it." They stood together in the quiet, beneath a sky blanketed in stars, breathing in the silence. Somewhere in that silence, the pieces of Adrienne's carefully crafted defenses lay scattered. And for once, she didn't feel the need to pick them up again. The final night of the leadership retreat was quiet but electric. Not flashy, not loud, just meaningful. The Karen Institute's garden courtyard had been strung with soft golden lights, their glow swaying gently with the mountain breeze. Dozens of small lanterns floated in shallow reflecting pools, casting dancing shadows along the stone paths. Laughter echoed between tall trees as mentors, staff, and the 24 participants gathered one last time. Miguel stood near the edge of it all, talking with a few of the newer mentees. They asked him how he'd stayed grounded, how he navigated the pressure of being the quiet leader. He answered honestly, like always, not with anecdotes about power or glory, but with small stories, folding napkins for tips in Dustmere, carrying food trays between classes, calling his grandparents every Sunday. "You just keep showing up," he said, "and eventually, you realize you're not invisible anymore." Across the courtyard, Adrienne watched him with something deeper than pride. She hadn't meant to come to the party at all, big gatherings still made her uneasy, but tonight, she felt pulled by something beyond responsibility. She watched as Miguel laughed at someone's joke, offering a gentle nudge to a shy participant too nervous to speak up. He was still wearing the same pair of second-hand shoes he'd shown up with weeks ago. He still kept his phone on low brightness to conserve battery. But everyone was listening to him now. Because he had never needed a stage to be heard. She approached as the music dipped into a soft instrumental piece. Miguel glanced up, smiling as if he had been waiting for her to appear. "I was just about to find you," he said. "I beat you to it," she replied, smiling back. They walked side by side to a bench tucked beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Lantern light filtered through the branches, casting soft, shifting patterns on the ground around them. Adrienne held a folded piece of paper in her hand, a letter, edges creased and thumbed. She offered it without fanfare. "I was going to wait until morning," she said, "but I'm not great at waiting." Miguel opened it slowly. His eyes scanned the header. Karen Institute, Director of Community Impact Initiatives. He blinked. "Director? It's not just a title," she said. "It's a platform. A voice. A seat at the table." Miguel looked at her, stunned. "But I'm not." She raised an eyebrow. "Not what? Not polished enough? Not loud enough?" "Miguel, I've seen world leaders command crowds with $10 words and leave no one changed. But you? You listen people into transformation." His throat tightened. "Why me?" "Because," Adrienne said, "you lead with heart. Because you remind people of what matters. And because this foundation isn't about optics anymore. It's about truth. And I trust yours." He looked down at the paper again, then back up at her. "You trust me?" "With everything," she said. Then her voice dropped. "In more ways than you know." She stood, suddenly restless, pacing a few steps before stopping. She looked back at him, her expression more open than he had ever seen. "There's something else," she said. "Something harder to say." Miguel stood too, sensing the shift. "I've spent most of my life thinking love was either a distraction or a risk I couldn't afford. That letting someone in meant losing control, and I don't do well with losing control." He didn't say anything. Just watched her. Steady. Patient. "But then I met you," she said. "And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled away from who I was. I felt like I'd finally come home to it." Miguel took a slow step forward, heart pounding. "I know the age gap is a thing," she added quickly. "And there's the power dynamics, and the optics, and all the things people will whisper if this ever becomes public." He reached out, gently took her hand. "But life isn't lived on paper," he said. "And if there's one thing I know, it's that when I'm near you, I'm not afraid of the future anymore." She looked at him, tears gathering but not falling. "I want to walk into that future," he said softly, "with you." They stood beneath a dogwood tree, fingers intertwined, neither of them speaking, because everything had already been said. Not student and benefactor. Not lost boy and powerful woman. Just two people who had quietly found their way to each other. 2 years later, the Karen Institute had changed. It wasn't just larger, it was deeper. Its new programs reached rural communities, built mental health infrastructure in overlooked neighborhoods, funded food justice initiatives in towns like Dustmere, and created educational incubators across the country. At the center of it all stood Miguel. His suit was tailored now, but still simple, understated. His presence, however, was anything but. He had become the face of ethical leadership for a generation too cynical to trust power. His speeches didn't make headlines for shock value, but for truth. He stood at the podium of the World Youth Leadership Summit, facing thousands of attendees and global delegates. Behind him, a screen cycled through images: children gathered around clean water pumps, teenagers learning to grow food in urban gardens, young leaders debating restorative justice policies. He leaned toward the mic, voice calm and warm. "There was a time," he began, "when I lived above a laundromat in a town no one talked about. My phone barely worked, my clothes never matched, and I thought the best I could hope for was survival." A hush fell over the room. Then one night, a woman I didn't know asked to borrow my phone. I could have said no. I almost did. But I didn't. He glanced toward the front row, where Adrienne sat, her eyes shining. She wore no jewelry, no attention-grabbing outfit, just quiet pride. "That moment," he continued, "that one act of trust, became a turning point in my life. Not because she changed everything, but because she saw something in me I hadn't yet seen in myself." He let the words settle. "I used to believe small things didn't matter. That no one noticed. But now I know better. Now I know it's the small acts, of kindness, of courage, of generosity, that change everything." He smiled, looking out at the crowd. "So if you're wondering where to start, don't wait for the perfect role or the perfect moment. Just start with the yes. Because sometimes, one yes is all it takes to rewrite a future." The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was reverent. People didn't just hear his story. They believed it. Later that evening, away from the bright lights and cameras, Miguel and Adrienne walked barefoot along a quiet stretch of Oregon coast. The tide lapped gently at their feet, the sky streaked with indigo and gold. Miguel held his shoes in one hand, Adrienne's hand in the other. "You've come a long way from that night at the diner," she said with a smile. "And you've come a long way from hiding behind glass towers," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. They walked in silence for a while, their footprints trailing behind them like a story written across the sand. At the horizon, sky and sea melted into one. And in that quiet, sacred space, two people once divided by status, age, and circumstance stood side by side, not as anomaly, not as scandal, but as a testament. A testament that kindness is louder than legacy. That trust can bloom where logic says it shouldn't. And that love, the real, slow-burning, soul-deep kind, is never bound by what makes sense on paper. Because sometimes, all it takes is one borrowed phone, one ordinary night, and one unexpected yes, to change everything.